Hey class, I want to take a few minutes to talk to you all about the opening sentence of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. The opening sentence in Aristotle's works, or at least in his major works, generally sets the theme for the entire text, and there's a sense in which if you understand the deepest meaning of the sentence, you will understand the entire book, or vice versa, you won't understand the opening sentence until you've understood the entire book. So let's take a look at the opening sentence, and I'm going to be reading from my beat-up old copy of the Nicomachean Ethics. So Aristotle writes, "Every craft and every line of inquiry, and likewise every action and decision, seem to seek some good. That is why some people were right to describe the good as what everything seeks." All right, so let's start with the last part of the sentence. That is why some people were right to describe the good as what everything seeks. The first question would be, well, who are those people that Aristotle is referring to? Generally speaking, Aristotle, amongst other things, is a historian of philosophy, and he often refers to the ideas and views of his predecessors. You see this a lot in his Metaphysics, where there's long commentaries on Plato's work and references to the work of pre-Platonic or pre-Socratic philosophers that we only know about almost through Aristotle's testimony because their works have been lost. And so those people that Aristotle is talking about in this case would be other philosophers. So this raises the question of Aristotle's relationship with Plato, which you'll see discussed more in Book 1 of the Nicomachean Ethics, where Aristotle is quite critical of Plato's idea of the good, which, as you know, is one of the centerpieces in the Republic. The gist of Aristotle's criticism of Plato's idea of the good is that it's so remote, so transcendental, in a way almost so good that it is good for nothing. And that Plato's notion of the good is sort of too hyperbolic to adequately respond to what we actually think of as goodness or good things. We might say that the good, the Platonic good, is good for nothing. So Aristotle is going to seek a more down-to-earth notion of the good and of goodness. And we can see that down-to-earth interest that Aristotle has in the first part of this sentence, where he runs through this list of activities, crafts, lines of inquiry, action, decision, right, seem to seek some good. All of those things are things that human beings do. They're all human actions. And Aristotle is going to closely tie his notion of the good to human action, right? That goodness or the good for Aristotle is intimately related to human action in a way that it's not really for Plato. In Plato, sort of the good is out there, whether or not anybody knows about it or whether or not anybody cares, right? Even if everybody's still in the cave, the good is out there. But for Aristotle, the good is very closely tied to human life and human action. And in this catalog of different activities that he goes through in the first part of this sentence, we have craft, line of inquiry, action, and decision. We get sort of what for Aristotle are some like the major facets of human life. So the word craft, you might think of arts and crafts, and there is an element of that, but the word is actually in Greek techne. And techne has a very specific meaning that Aristotle will actually discuss at some length in Book 6 of the Nicomachean Ethics, where techne is the virtue concerned with knowing how to do things. And it's a combination of practical activity and knowledge. We'll get into this more later, but if you think of like a carpenter or an electrician or really sort of anyone in the trades, that Aristotle would say that they possess the virtue of techne, in that they know how to do things. They know how to wire a house for power, or they know how to build cabinetry and things like that. And this is what Aristotle will characterize as an intellectual virtue. Similarly, line of inquiry, that other phrase that he uses, is translating theoria, which is the root of our word theory, and it's also an intellectual virtue. The main difference between theoria and techne in Aristotle's thinking is that theoria is the intellectual virtue concerned with just thinking about things rather than doing or making things. So for Aristotle, the prime example of theoria is mathematics, because in his understanding of mathematics, what one just does is think about mathematical objects. One does not seek to do anything with mathematics. In his view, you don't use math to do anything other than understand things. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, that's clearly the wrong view of mathematics because we use math all the time in science and engineering and things like that. And that's an important point, and it will get to something that we'll talk about later, which is Aristotle has a very different conception of science, what science is, how science works, and what it's for, than we do. Aristotelian science and modern science are very much different. But in any case, if we just take the craft and line of inquiry, we can sort of take this in a broad sense as practical reasoning and theoretical reasoning. So all of the sort of the usage of your mind can be summed up, with the exception of imagination, which we can get to later, is connected with an idea of the good. And every action and decision, right? Everything we do and everything we decide to do is also aimed at some good, right? So that Aristotle's basic point in this sentence is that everything that human beings do is aimed at some good. Now, immediately you're going to say to yourself, or say to the screen, well, what about when people do things that are wrong? What about when people do things that are evil? What about when people do things that I think are terrible? How can Aristotle say that they are seeking the good? Aristotle is clearly an idiot. Well, as you'll see when you read forward, although everybody is seeking the good, Aristotle says, not everybody agrees as to what's good, and not everybody is correct in their evaluation of the goodness or badness of things. And one of the first things that we're going to have to do in the book, and in fact, you might say, arguably the major theme of the book, is to try to figure out, of all the different conceptions of the good, which one is right and which ones are wrong, and why is it right or why is it wrong. Aristotle will run through a couple different conceptions of the good. He mentions the view that the good life is a life of pleasure, the view that the good life is a life of wealth and money-making, the view that the good life is a life of honor and prestige and celebrity, or the view that the good life is a life of what he calls study, or in some translations, contemplation. Of these different ways of life, Aristotle thinks that the life of study or contemplation is the best one. That is the best way of life. And again, you might be listening to this and saying, well, that sounds like something a philosopher would say, but this is clearly not the best way of life, because I clearly don't think that I'm happiest when I'm doing my homework, or that studying is the best thing for me to do with my life. Again, we have to read the whole book to understand what Aristotle means by study or contemplation, and what it is that he has in mind that we should study or contemplate. It's not studying or contemplating any old stupid thing. But we'll get to that later. Of the other ways of life, the ways of life that he's going to dismiss, we have the life of pleasure seeking, which is probably the most common view of what the good life is. Aristotle calls it the vulgar view. It's the view of the mass of people, the vulgus, right? That, they speak the vulgar tongue rather than the elevated languages, and right, you can think of all of those sort of connotations. But this is the most common view of what happiness or the good life consists in, and Aristotle thinks that this is clearly stupid, and His argument is really quite simple, and it's reminiscent of one that you find in I want to say Book 9 of the Republic, where he says this is basically a life fit for animals, right? It's not that Aristotle thinks pleasure is bad. He just thinks that it can't possibly be the best thing that human beings are capable of. It can't possibly be the best thing in our life that we all seek. Because if that was the case, then, a rat running around happily in a dumpster behind Kentucky Fried Chicken eating, the leftovers that they throw out would be living a happy life, because that rat's life is filled with all the pleasures a rat could have. Since we think we're better than rats, and we would not be satisfied living in a dumpster behind Kentucky Fried Chicken, then the life of a rat, the life of pleasure, can't possibly be the best life. Well, what about the life of money making? Maybe the point of life isn't pleasure, the point of life is just to make money and all of those things. Again, Aristotle doesn't have a problem with money per se, but he does think that this can't possibly be the best way of life for one simple reason. Money is a tool. It's a means. It's not an end. If I say, well, why do you want to have money? You might say, so I can do this or so I can do that. So what that means is that as important as money may or may not be to you, it's not the ultimate end that you're seeking. Maybe you're seeking money so that you can take care of your family. Maybe you're seeking money so that you can, buy a boat. Maybe you're seeking money so that you can, donate it to charity, right? All of those things that you want to use money for are more important than the money itself. So Aristotle's going to say the life of the moneymaker can't possibly be the best way of life. It can't be the good that everything is seeking. And what about the life of honor or celebrity? Well, Aristotle says here that the life of honor or celebrity is also not a viable candidate for being the best way of life, because it is dependent not so much on me and the quality of my life, but how it appears to other people. And those other people could be wrong. Right? We've all heard the saying about the tears of the clown, right? Everyone thinks that they're funny and happy and things, but they're crying on the inside. Or we've heard stories about, celebrities that seem to have it all together, but then, Us Weekly does a story and you find out that their life sucks and you never would want to be them. So celebrity can't be the ultimate end in life either. So Aristotle's going to argue in the Nicomachean Ethics that, as I was saying earlier, it's contemplation and contemplation of certain things. But that still might seem implausible. Even if you agree with Aristotle that the other possibilities, the other conceptions of the good are incorrect, you might not be willing to go with him all the way to say that the life of contemplation is the correct one. Well, that's why the Nicomachean Ethics is so long, to explain to you why it is. And he's going to do that by developing a theory of the virtues. The word virtue translates the Greek word arete, which means excellence. Right? Aristotle's going to begin by saying, what does an excellent person look like? What are traits that when we see them, we recognize them as admirable and praiseworthy and excellent? And he's going to use his analysis of that to try to build the case for the claim that the best way of life is contemplation. He'll begin by talking about what he calls the moral virtues or the virtues of character. These are things like courage, wit, moderation, and things like that. And then he'll turn to the intellectual virtues or the virtues of the mind. And it's through this analysis that he will begin to try to make the case for his claim that the good that all activities seek or should seek is the contemplative life. And